I built a private road on my own land with my own money. No HOA. No shared access. Then one morning, a letter showed up demanding payment to use their road. What happened next wasn't a mistake, it was a calculated attempt to steal my land on paper. I didn't buy land in the mountains because I wanted neighbors. I bought it because I wanted silence. 20 acres of Colorado hillside, thick with pine and scrub, high enough that the air tasted cleaner the moment you stepped out of your truck. No street lights. No noise. No one telling you what color your fence should be or how tall your grass was allowed to grow. After more than 20 years designing highways and drainage systems for the Texas Department of Transportation, I was done with committees, meetings, and people who'd never held a shovel telling me how roads should be built. This place was supposed to be simple. When I first walked the property, the view sealed it for me. A long ridge line to the west, the valley opening up below like a painted backdrop. The kind of place where your phone stops buzzing because there's barely any signal and you realize how much of your life you've been living on notifications. The only problem was the road. Calling it a road was generous. It was more like a scar carved into the hillside, a rutted, rain-chewed track that twisted down to the county highway like it was trying to escape the mountain. Deep grooves where runoff had eaten through the dirt. Rocks the size of microwaves sticking out at random angles. Every trip up or down meant bottoming out the suspension and holding your breath, hoping today wasn't the day you snapped an axle. At first, I told myself I could live with it. People romanticize rough access when they're buying land. They tell themselves it builds character. But after a week of white-knuckle drives and cursing every pothole, I knew better. This wasn't charming. It was stupid. And dangerous. So I did what stubborn engineers do when faced with a bad design. I fixed it. I didn't rush into it. I pulled surveys. Checked boundaries. Verified setbacks. I walked the entire length of my property line with a GPS unit and old plat maps just to be sure. The access path was entirely inside my land, no easements, no shared rights, no HOA involvement of any kind. The nearest planned community sat nearly 2 miles downslope, separated by trees and distance and absolutely none of my concern. Once I knew I was clear, I drew up plans. Not napkin sketches, real ones. Grading profiles. Drainage channels. Culvert placement. Concrete thickness calculated for freeze cycles and runoff load. If I was going to build a road, it was going to be one that would outlive me. I hired a small local crew. Nothing fancy. Guys who knew dirt and stone and didn't need everything explained twice. For 3 months, we worked that hillside. Cutting and shaping the slope. Installing drainage so water would flow under the road instead of through it. Pouring concrete in carefully timed sections so temperature changes wouldn't crack it. It cost me a fortune. Over $100,000 by the time it was done. Most of my savings, gone into something most people would never think twice about. But the first time I drove up that finished stretch of concrete, it was worth every penny. The truck rolled smooth and quiet. No rattling. No jolts. Just a clean curve climbing toward my cabin like it had always belonged there. I remember easing off the gas halfway up, just to feel it, the road holding steady beneath me, solid and reliable. For about a week, life was perfect. Morning started with coffee on the porch and the sun sliding over the ridge. Even the drive down to town felt different. Controlled. Calm. Like I'd finally wrestled a little piece of order out of the chaos. Then one morning, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope that felt wrong. Thick paper. Official looking. The kind of envelope that makes your stomach tighten before you even read it. The letterhead said Rich Pine Peaks Homeowners Association. I stared at it for a moment, genuinely confused. Rich Pine Peaks was a planned development miles away, a gated cluster of matching timber frame homes and retirees who took lawn compliance way too seriously. I had nothing to do with them. No shared roads. No shared land. No shared anything. I opened the letter anyway. At first, I laughed. It claimed I owed them money for unauthorized use of community road infrastructure. According to the letter, I had been accessing Rich Pine Peak's transportation network without permission. There was a fee listed and a warning about enforcement. I reread it twice, waiting for the punchline. Unless their transportation network had suddenly expanded to include deer trails and pine needles, there was no universe where this applied to me. My road started on my land and ended on my land. The closest HOA boundary was far enough away that you'd need binoculars to see it. I tossed the letter on the counter and told myself it was a clerical error. Some spreadsheet mistake. Someone fat-fingered a parcel number. 5 days later, another envelope arrived. This one was stamped final notice. The amount had increased. The language was sharper. It talked about escalation and enforcement actions. It was written with that particular HOA tone, polite on the surface, threatening underneath. Like it was daring me to argue. I tried calling the number listed. I got an automated menu that wanted me to report non-compliant decorations. I hung up. The moment I realized this wasn't just paperwork gone wrong came a few days later. I was driving down my road, humming to myself, enjoying the curve near the bottom where the concrete leveled out before meeting the county highway. As I rounded the bend, a white SUV was parked sideways across the exit. A man in a Rich Pine Peak security vest stepped out. "Sir," he said, voice flat and rehearsed, "you are not authorized to use this road." I blinked at him. "I built this road," I said slowly. He didn't react. "According to the board, access to Rich Pine Peak's infrastructure requires payment. You are currently in noncompliance." I stared at him, trying to decide if this was a prank. "This is my driveway," I said. "Private. On my land." He repeated the line like a malfunctioning robot. That was the moment something shifted. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake. This was someone trying to assert ownership over something that very clearly didn't belong to them. When I told him I'd call the sheriff if he didn't move the vehicle, he finally did, slow, deliberate, making sure I saw the HOA badge on his vest as he pulled away. Later that day, I went straight to the county office. The clerk pulled up the property records, frowned, and turned her monitor toward me. A red outline stretched up the hillside on the screen, wrapping around my driveway like it had always been there. "Rich Pine Peaks filed a boundary expansion map this spring," she said. "According to this, your road falls within their jurisdiction." I felt cold all at once. That map wasn't optimism. It wasn't sloppy drawing. It was a hostile rewrite of reality. And staring at that red line swallowing the road I'd built with my own hands, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to end quietly. The map didn't make sense. I stood there in the county office staring at the screen, watching a clean red boundary line swallow my driveway like it had always belonged there. According to Rich Pine Peaks, my private road, the one I'd surveyed, permitted, graded, drained, poured, and paid for, was suddenly part of their community infrastructure. I asked the clerk to zoom in. She did. The red outline curved unnaturally, like someone had dragged it by hand just far enough to capture the road, then stopped. It didn't follow terrain. It didn't follow historic parcel lines. It followed convenience. "When was this filed?" I asked. "Spring," she said. "Looks like it was submitted with resident approval." She clicked another tab. That's when I saw it. A signature page. 3 names signed under a statement affirming consent to boundary expansion. 2 I didn't recognize. The third was mine. My name. In cursive. I laughed once, short and sharp. "That's not my signature." The clerk leaned closer. "You sure?" "I haven't signed my name in cursive since high school." I took photos of the screen, every page, every line. When I got back to my truck, I sent them to an old friend of mine from Texas, Hal, who'd spent years doing document forensics for the state. He called me 20 minutes later. "Yeah," he said. "That's forged. Sloppy, too." Looks like someone traced it off a driver's license. I sat there with the engine idling, staring out at the mountains. Forgery meant intent. Intent meant escalation. By the time I got back up the hill, Rich Pine Peaks had already made their next move. At the bottom of my road, right where it met the county highway, stood a brand new gate. One of those plastic arm barriers you see at parking garages. Yellow and white. A keypad bolted to a post. And a sign screwed into the dirt beside it. Private community road, authorized vehicles only. Contact Rich Pine Peaks HOA for access. I just stared at it. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. They hadn't just sent letters anymore. They'd physically blocked my access to the outside world. On my land. I filmed everything. Close-ups of the gate. The keypad. The sign. Then I walked the entire length of the road with my drone, recording one uninterrupted shot from my cabin down to the barrier. No shared easements. No intersections. Nothing but my concrete. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, he was polite but cautious. "Sir, this looks like a civil dispute," he said. "Without a court order, there's not much we can do." I handed him my deed. The original survey. The county-approved permits. Then I showed him the forged HOA filing. "And that gate?" I said. "It's on my property." He frowned. "Well, that changes things." He took photos, filed a report, and suggested I talk to a lawyer. No arrests. No citations. Just more paper. So I handled the gate myself. 10 minutes with bolt cutters and it was lying in the ditch. I filmed the entire process, calm narration, clear angles, documenting that I was removing an obstruction from my own land. The next day, Rich Pine Peaks sent me another letter. Not certified. Hand-delivered. Rolled into a plastic sleeve and shoved into my fence post. It accused me of vandalism. They demanded I pay for the damaged community access equipment. They threatened liens. Legal action. All written in stiff HOA legalese and signed by no one, just community compliance officer. That was when I hired a lawyer. Her name was Sylvia Grant. Sharp. Efficient. The kind of person who reads threats like grocery lists. "They're trying to do two things," she said after reviewing everything. "Create a paper trail claiming jurisdiction and provoke you into overreacting." "I already cut their gate," I said. She smiled. "Good. That means we're not playing defense." She filed an injunction, a cease and desist, and began prepping a countersuit. Then she hired a licensed cadastral surveyor to re-verify my land boundaries down to the inch. 2 days later, the surveyor confirmed what I already knew. The HOA map was fiction. My road never crossed their land. Not by a foot. Not by an inch. Their internal road network ended hundreds of feet away. But the name on the HOA filing stopped Sylvia cold. "Jeremy Cross," she said. "I know him. He used to be a licensed surveyor. Lost his certification after falsifying boundary reports for a developer years ago. Same trick. Different county." That night, I got a motion alert from one of my trail cameras. 2 men in high-visibility vests stood halfway up my road. One held a crowbar. The other carried a clipboard. I was in my truck before the footage finished buffering. By the time I reached the spot, they were gone. But the damage wasn't. The concrete lip of a drainage outlet had been smashed. Rebar exposed. Enough damage to cause pooling during the next rain. Someone had dumped gravel across one lane, not enough to block it, just enough to force you to slow down. I photographed everything. When Sylvia saw the images, her expression hardened. "That's infrastructure sabotage," she said. "Now we're talking felony-level damages." We filed a police report. The deputy this time was far more attentive. "You've got cameras. Footage. Documentation," he said. We'll forward this to the DA. The repair estimate came back the next day. Nearly $12,000. We added it to the lawsuit. By the end of the week, I was officially suing Rich Pine Peaks HOA for fraud, obstruction, harassment, and property destruction. Their response? They sued me back. Their claim accused me of illegally using community infrastructure, damaging HOA property, and obstructing shared access. They included a satellite image with my road labeled Community Arterial, dated 3 weeks before the road even existed. They didn't even bother fixing the timestamps, Sylvia muttered. Then things turned darker. Cars from the HOA neighborhood started idling near my entrance. One afternoon, a man with a telephoto lens sat parked across the highway, snapping photos. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of metal scraping concrete. I moved downhill through the trees, flashlight off, phone recording. 2 men were chiseling into the edge of the road. A third stood watch near an unmarked utility truck. I stepped out and lit them up with my beam. You lost? I asked. They ran. By morning, I found spray-painted markings on the pavement. A shallow trench hacked into the edge, an attempt to undermine the subgrade. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was war. And as I stood there looking at my damaged road for the second time in a week, one truth became painfully clear. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to make me leave. By the time the sun came up after that second night of sabotage, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. What I felt was colder than that. Someone had crossed from intimidation into deliberate destruction. They weren't trying to scare me into compliance anymore, they were trying to break the road. Undermine it. Make it unsafe. Force me out quietly and let the paperwork finish the job later. I filed another report with the sheriff's department, handed over the footage, and added the damage photos to our case file. Sylvia's voice on the phone was flat, professional, and very controlled. That's premeditated, she said. They're escalating. We need the district attorney involved. She wasn't exaggerating. Later that afternoon, I got a call from a man named Harris Brinkley. He said he'd done landscaping work for Rich Pine Peaks in the past, but wanted nothing to do with them anymore. I saw your name in the paper, he said. The road guy. That's me. There was a pause. Then he exhaled hard. They paid contractors cash to dump gravel on your road. Told them it was community land. I refused, but I know others didn't. I asked him if he was willing to put that in writing. Another pause. Let me think, he said. But watch your property. They're not just trying to fine you. They're trying to erase you. The next morning, I found a pile of debris dumped at the top of my road. Old fence panels. Bags of leaves. Scrap lumber with rusty nails. On one board, someone had spray-painted, "Community Right-of-Way." I didn't touch it. Instead, I launched the drone and filmed everything from above: timestamps, GPS overlays, clean evidence. Sylvia filed an emergency motion citing ongoing harassment, property damage, and threats to safety. Within 24 hours, a judge granted a temporary restraining order. Rich Pine Peaks HOA, its officers, and contractors were barred from coming within 100 yards of my property. At the hearing, the judge looked at the footage once and said, "This looks like organized intimidation. I'm not waiting for someone to get hurt." For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. That peace didn't last. 2 days later, 3 construction trucks showed up at the HOA entrance. Flatbeds. A bobcat. A water tanker. I caught it on the drone feed in real time. I drove down the hill fast. They were unloading gravel onto my drainage shoulder, the same engineered section they'd already damaged. One worker was stretching a string line across the pavement like they were about to dig. Karen Fowles, HOA president, stood there in a sun hat with a clipboard, smiling like this was all perfectly normal. "This is private property," I said calmly. "You're violating a court order." She waved a paper at me. "Revised Community Master Plan." It wasn't signed. It wasn't dated. It wasn't legal. I turned to the workers. Gentlemen, stop. Now. They hesitated. I called the sheriff. 15 minutes later, they were gone. The deputy watched the drone footage, shook his head, and said, "Judge is not going to like this." That evening, Harris Brinkley showed up at my door. He didn't hesitate this time. "I'm in," he said. "I'll testify." He told me everything. Cash payments. Fake inspection reports. Karen's plan to expand HOA boundaries by quietly filing altered maps and daring landowners to fight back. She said once she controlled your road, the rest would fall in line, he said. He signed a sworn affidavit in my kitchen. The next morning, Sylvia sent everything to the DA. By noon, the county issued a cease work order against Rich Pine Peaks HOA. Any further violations would result in arrests. Karen panicked. She sent letters accusing me of sabotaging community infrastructure. Claimed I was aggressive. Claimed I was blocking essential upgrades. It didn't work. Neighbors started calling me instead, offering footage, statements, support. That's when Annabelle Curtis called. Former board member. She'd resigned months earlier after seeing Karen's maps. "I kept copies," she said quietly. Emails. Drafts. Edits. Her archive was devastating. Digital boundary maps altered by hand. Messages discussing nudging property lines. Plans to file first and deal with objections later. The DA didn't call it clever. They called it fraud. Karen was arrested on a Thursday morning outside a nail salon. Felony charges, document tampering, conspiracy, criminal mischief. The HOA's accounts were frozen. Their expansion plat was suspended and flagged under investigation. Then came the dumbest move of all. That weekend, a crew showed up at dawn and started cutting into my road with concrete saws. Portable sign read, "Emergency Utility Access, authorized by HOA." I filmed everything. When deputies arrived, the workers couldn't name a utility. Couldn't produce a permit. All four were detained. Repair estimate, $42,000. We added it to the case. By the end of the month, Rich Pine Peaks HOA was suspended from operating. Karen's bail was revoked. The fake expansion map was declared legally void. My road was recertified as private infrastructure. Untouchable. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. I filed a petition with the County Planning Commission. Proposed a rule: privately built roads on non-HOA land could never be claimed retroactively by an HOA. They laughed. Then they read the case file. 3 months later, it passed. 6 months later, the state adopted it. They called it the Travis Road Act. I put up a sign at the entrance to my road. Private road, built, owned, and defended. That road cost me money. Time. Sleep. But it's mine. And now, it always will be.